What is your in-laws from hell story? My sister-in-law wanted my now husband, at the time boyfriend, to move with her to another state so that they could take care of their grandfather together. My husband, a full-grown man, wanted us to move in together instead, which we did. Sister-in-law started to do everything she could to set my now husband up with his ex-girlfriend. Ex-girlfriend and the sister-in-law were good friends. Even after hubby and I married, she continued to try to push the ex-girlfriend toward my husband. It was a nightmare. Hubby tried to get her to stop her crap, but she persisted, so he quit speaking to her completely. Number 2. My husband's family is religious, snake handling, etc. I'm an atheist, but have no problem with religious people. Most of my family is religious as well. One day I posted, "Happy birthday, Darwin," on FB. Nothing more than that. I didn't talk about evolution, etc. Well, crap hit the fan. I ended up being blocked by almost everyone in his family. No loss there. I should add that hubby is thoroughly disgusted with his family and he blocked every person who blocked me. Go, hubby. Story 2. My mother-in-law has a huge house with plenty of storage room. She offered to keep my wedding dress in a spare closet for me. Years later, when I had daughters, I asked if I could have it back. She informed me that the entire dress had been devoured by mice. Apparently, the mice didn't touch any other item in the house, only my wedding dress. My sister-in-law later informed me that my mother-in-law got rid of it out of spite. I would have loved to have been able to have some of the material to share in some ways with my daughters. I would have gladly taken the dress back if she no longer wanted to store it. She could have just asked. That's the big downside of dating mama's boys. Story 3. I have gout and CKD. First time meeting my wife's aunt from her father's side. My condition was brought up during the conversation with her as well as the food that I have to avoid. What's she aunt? So you can't eat beef? Me. No, I can't. Her. How about pork and seafood? Me. I have to avoid eating pork too, and I still have to watch out for certain seafood. Her. So why are you still alive? Her cheap ways gave us a used comforter as a wedding gift too. Lol. Wifey and I avoid her like the plague. Story 4. I've got a good one. Mother-in-law from hell. No, ex-mother-in-law actually. Wife and I are expecting our second baby and her mom has been living with us for months. We never asked her for any money and I even helped buy her a car. She needed help, so we helped. All we asked her was to please help us with our 3-year-old when we have to go to the hospital for the birth of the new baby. She agreed. She meets some guy and they start dating. She tells us privately she really doesn't like him, but she puts up with him because he spends a lot of money on her, buying her gifts and taking her on weekend trips to the casinos, etc. We go see the doctor and he schedules a C-section because we are almost at the end of the pregnancy and he doesn't want any complications. She had some complications with the first child, so we weren't surprised. We tell mother-in-law the plan and she agrees. The day we're going to the hospital, she comes downstairs with a suitcase and tells us she's heading out with him for another trip out of town somewhere. Says, good luck at the hospital, and doesn't understand why we were both floored by this. She said, just call someone else to come watch her. Literally. The freaking day we had planned to go have her baby, we asked her to watch her 3-year-old, but no. She blows us off for some dude she doesn't even like because he's spending the money on her. We were done. Told her she better get upstairs and pack all her stuff because if she doesn't, it will be in the front yard when she gets back. She packed her stuff up and moved out that night. They had their trip and she missed the birth of her granddaughter. They also broke up a few months later, and she tried to talk us into letting her move back into her house. Frick off. Not happening. Which is the most ridiculous person I've ever met. Sometimes, even parents don't grow up. Story 5. In-laws from hell. Started with a sister who has a lazy eye deciding she wanted to drive us all to a local mountain. Me, my girlfriend, my girlfriend's mom, and dad all hop in. Sister informs us she can't see well and has bad depth perception. Cue longest car ride where I'm constantly warning her of impending traffic, that she isn't in the right lane, and that she should really pay attention to the road. Her father this entire time was regaling her with stories, using very animated hand gestures and even going so far as to stick his face in front of his daughters, while she was driving, to illustrate a particularly interesting point in his story. He's a terrible driver too, so probably thought nothing of the life-threatening peril he was putting us all in. After driving for a couple hours, we find out that dear sister has no idea where the mountain is. We proceed to bust out phones and Google our way out of the situation, wherein we find we are about 2 hours off course. Yay. Back on course a few hours later, and lunchtime is rapidly approaching. Girlfriend and I hop out of the car as we stop and run over to a restaurant to get food, wherein girlfriend's father announces he wants to take off immediately because he saw a novelty train exhibit sign, and we must go see it. We refuse, he pouts, and proceeds to be in a bad mood for the remainder of the day for us not humoring his train obsession. Back in the car, almost to the mountain, and we realized that this wasn't the best planned day and no one knew where they wanted to go when we got there. I offer some suggestions as I'd been there previously, all of which were ignored. We continue driving. But by this point, it's getting late and we'd need to turn around if we wanted to get home at a reasonable time. I say this right as they decided they wanted to take the long way back to our home city, an extra 3 to 4 hours drive, and I just put my foot down and say no, we're going back the way we came and we're going now. On the way home, we almost got hit by a semi-truck. Wanted to end someone that day. Story 6. If the wrong person sees this, it'll start a debacle, but what the hell. My sister-in-law started romantically and creepily stalking my uncle. Gross, right? She was following him home and sitting outside of his house, sending him text messages asking for him to let her in for just one night of passion, saying that she knows he wants her, and all sorts of other delusional nonsense. She joins a group at his work and would show up to events even after she had been banned. It got pretty scary since we didn't know how far she might take it. She's been attempting to harm herself in the past, and is generally pretty wacko. My brother found out about the stalking and all the other men she had been sleeping with, and she responded by threatening to divorce him. He cowered down and begged her to make things work, because, well, I have no idea why. She convinced him that he was letting our mother ruin their lives and has been ruining his life since childhood. She forced him to write an email to my mother, letting her know all these things that she had done wrong. None of them were true. In the midst of all this going down, after the stalking and before the letter, my mom had been paying rent to live in a home that they owned. But after my sister-in-law had threatened to kick her out for the 3rd time, she decided to move. She gave my brother 60 days notice and he said no problem. That night, my sister-in-law showed up at the house with the cops and tried to have my mom forcibly removed and told the cops this story. The cops obviously told her that they couldn't do anything. Both sister-in-law and brother have sent emails to every single employee and manager at both my mother's and uncle's work filled with lies and threats in order to attempt to damage my mom and uncle's reputation. The cops have been called on multiple occasions. It never got violent, but it got pretty aggressive from time to time. There's so much more insanity I could mention, but I think you guys and gals get the point. Insanely crazy. The worst of it all, though, my mother and their daughter, my niece, had an extremely close relationship, and they've cut my mom off from having any communication with her grandchildren. My mom knows my sister-in-law is crazy, and that my brother is either whipped or just as delusional as sister-in-law, or that he's just an a-hole. But it tears me apart to see my mother crying because she can't see her granddaughter. It tears me apart even more to think that those poor kids have to grow up in such an insane household. Story 7. I have a good one, but she's my wife's aunt, so I hope that still counts. Last year, we drove up to their town to spend Christmas Eve with my parents-in-law and their entire family. Her aunt was there, we will call her aunt for obvious reasons. While we go into my wife's grandmother's house and I introduce myself to aunt, and she looks at me and goes, "Well, you're the baby exterminator I've heard so much about." Side note, I was in the Marines. Those were the first words out of her mouth she had ever spoken to me. Fast forward about 2 hours and many insults later, aunt proceeds to get completely smashed. I mean, she can't put together a sentence and has decided that the time is now to let her mother know how much she hates her. She goes into a great deal about how she believes her mother is a drab. She moves on to say, and I quote, "Over 50 men, mother. That's how many men I've been with. Why couldn't you have taught me how to close it rather than spread them for money?" Well, unfortunately, I was a little sauced and I couldn't help but burst out laughing. So aunt turned her rage over to me. She yelled at me that I must want to go for a ride and proceeded to jump on my lap. Naturally, I stood up quickly and then she went flying off of me and hit her head against the corner of the coffee table. She was out cold and had to be taken to the hospital via ambulance. So she leaves and the rest of the night goes just fine. We all sort of pretended nothing has happened. Fast forward 2 weeks and I got a bill in the mail from aunt stating that it was my fault that she had hit her head, and I needed to pay all of her medical bills because she had no insurance. I got in touch with the rest of the family that was there and we all agreed I certainly did not need to pay her bills. I haven't seen this woman since and she has been barred from all future family events. Overall, fun night. I always hated it when that one person has to be the center of attention. Kudos to this guy for not ending her. He acted pretty well. Respect. Anyway, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Now let's go ahead and get back to the video. Story 8. I had told my ex-sister-in-law that her mom was talking smack on her, and she stopped talking to her. For some other reason I can't remember, my ex-husband had also stopped talking to her. Months later, he and his mom made up and she invited us over for lunch. I told my ex that I didn't want to go but went along anyway. We got there and everything was going well until my ex went outside for a cigarette. His mom started talking crap about everyone. I wouldn't say a word. She wanted me to join in and started asking me questions, acting all crazy. I didn't answer her. She stood up and threw her middle fingers up and waved them around, saying, "Screw everyone. Screw all my kids." She then asked me some more questions and I didn't answer her, refusing to play into her crazy antics. Her last question was, "Why aren't you answering me and are you retarded?" I told her something like, "I don't want to be gossiping." And she came at me and put her hand over my mouth, hard squeezing it, saying, "Don't speak in my house," and I said, "This is America." She then put her hands on me as my ex came in. He said to get out of there. As I was trying to leave through the door, she took me by the hair, making my body fall back. My ex got her to stop pulling my hair. But then she grabbed me, digging her sharp fingernails into my arm while yelling that I was taking her son away from her. I finally got outside and yelled some expletives at her. I got in the car and cried really hard. I'm so glad to be away from that messed up family. Story 9. My brother-in-law, who I thought I was cool with, apparently had been harboring feelings of resentment and the attitude that I wasn't good enough for his little sister. Last time I saw him, he, 6'+", extremely well-built champion kickboxer, hurt me and shoved me. 5'9" average guy who only ever trained for 3 months, to the ground. Thankfully, we now live on almost opposite sides of the planet. I've told my wife that I will never stop her from seeing him, but I don't want to be within 50 miles of him, and if he ever lays a hand on me again, I will, at minimum, be filing for a restraining order. Dude scares the crap out of me. Another one, not me but my sister's story. Her ex's mother was a true nightmare. She would open and check the contents of her bag, get jealous when her boyfriend bought her presents, had one towel in the bathroom for the whole family, filthy all the time, would come into the bedroom in the middle of the night and turn me around if I was sleeping belly up, would add food I did not like into dishes to trick me, tried to guilt my ex into having us living together with her instead of moving in together in another house. Story 10. Let's see. I'm from the US, my wife is from Quebec. Shortly after we were married, they wanted to come down to visit us. This was 10 years ago or so. So we said sure, but we had a small apartment and told them they could come, but had to pay their own way in a motel and food costs. We just got married and didn't have the money because we had to pay off their credit card. This is another story completely. They agreed, came down, found my parents and invited themselves to stay at their house, requiring them to make them breakfast. For the time they were there, they had to pay all their food costs and they were picky about what they got. Granted, they did pay to go out for themselves when they weren't there, and in passing handed my wife her bank records from her account that had about $500 in it that we were saving for living off it when we went to visit them in Quebec. It showed they had removed the money from the account. Apparently she had access to it somehow. When asked nicely, she said she did and didn't see a problem. I politely told her we considered our money, as it was, in my wife's account, but since my mother-in-law needed it to pay off the same credit card, again, they just took it. My wife was pissed. I was pissed, and told them it was stealing. Fight ensued and ended. I took a short 10-minute drive in my motorcycle to cool off. I came back to find out that my wife's stepdad had tried to hit my wife. My brother-in-law luckily stepped in and stopped it. I went ballistic. I've never been so mad. Middle of summer near the busy pool of the apartment complex, I went off on my father-in-law. They'd been trying to pack and leave before I got back. I went off on him, pushing him, asking why he tried to hit my wife. I'm much bigger and meaner than this guy and he was agitated. Nice crowd gathered of my neighbors rooting me on, obviously knowing what went on because I was yelling it. He backs down and says sorry, and my mother-in-law proceeds to try and tell me that she's a matriarch and we will do what she wants. I made it clear that they held nothing over me and my wife and that we would be doing what we want. They left. I've only seen them once since and talked to them on the phone maybe 5 or 6 times, and half of them were as traumatic as that time. Ever since, my mother-in-law has been trying to get rid of me. I will say that not one person called the cops on me despite the entire pool and a number of onlookers that came out to see the show, and I most certainly looked like I was going to throttle this guy into pulp. I'm surprised it ended with me kicking him out and telling never to come back. If there was a time I wasn't in control, it was then. Damn. No fight? Bummer. Story 11. Not exactly mine, but my husband's. We first started dating when he was stationed in a decently sized border town, my hometown, with a strong Latino culture. My family is not entirely traditional, but when it comes to love and dating, they strongly abide by the old rules. After graduating from college and moving home for a bit, at 24, I had an 11 p.m. curfew. Had to introduce all of my dates to my mother and was expected to remain pure. My mom waited up for me every night and expected a breakdown of my activities of the night to make sure they stayed within her strict guidelines. We had been going out for a year when we lost track of time and he kept me out past midnight. I was sweating bullets the entire ride home. Because in Mexican-American culture, it does not matter how old you are. You still respect your parents and live by their rules until you're settled with a husband of your own. When we arrived at my place, it was lit up like a Christmas tree. Every single light in the house was on and visible from the street, mainly because all the curtains were pulled wide open. My mom ran up to the door and yelled at my future husband until he got out of the car. This 27-year-old man from Iowa was true to new one in 2 languages for a solid hour, loud enough for a large number of neighbors to gather outside on their lawns to watch the show. I was absolutely horrified, and absolutely sure this was the end of any romantic relationship I could possibly have with this man. To my surprise, he remained calm, apologized like this was not weird at all, and managed to calm my raging bull of a mother down enough to inspire her to invite him to dinner that Sunday to redeem himself. Over 5 years and a wedding have passed, and she still tries to pull rank on him every once in a while. She still pulls all sorts of hell if he slips up and calls her by her first name instead of the formal Mrs. Twitterless Christie. He has dodged most of the bullets by learning more about her culture and learning Spanish. I'm now the one yelled at. If you don't cook and clean more, that pinche gringo will leave you, mija. You need to get it together. Thanks, Mom. Thanks. Story 12. I just got married at a destination wedding in June. My now husband's parents divorced years ago and proved during his wedding for his first marriage that they can't be in the same town together without causing a drama storm. So they weren't invited. His mom was very smart despite her disposition and figured out we were getting married. Her response was, "Oh, thank goodness I'm not going. I've already been to one wedding of his and I don't want to go through the trouble again." This pissed me off to high hell because I can't imagine how not wanting to be around when my child is getting married, even if it is a second marriage, but whatever, screw her. When we got back, she immediately threw a fit, insisting that she had no idea. We were poking nicely on Facebook at one of my friends who said he'd come but didn't show, and of course she commented, "Don't worry, he didn't even have the decency to tell his own mother." She's also the type to call him and tell him, "We're going to be at your house on Wednesday and staying for a week." Not asking, just telling. She lives 8 hours away, so luckily this only happened once, but I can definitely see it happening in the future. Every time I hear anything about her, it just pisses me off at this point, and I can't wait to move even farther away from her. She hasn't done anything bad, and for that I'm grateful, because I know she's not a bad person, but she's definitely self-absorbed and passive-aggressive enough to just piss me off. Luckily, my parents are awesome and absolutely adore my husband. So after years of having an utterly family, he's finally able to have some decent relatives he can actually converse with. Lucky him. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.